welcome back to Shop Talk with Cravon Studios here. I'm Rocky, and I want to do a little series of videos about advice. There's a lot of it out there, and I've been combing through as much of it as I can. I've read books recently. In fact, you might want to get this one. Go to the Board Game Design Lab and pick up this book. It's about a bunch of advice from some of the world's best game designers. So Gabe Barrett put this together from the Board Game Design Lab, and I highly recommend this. This has been a nice little concise collection of advice. I don't have a lot of published games yet. I'm not in the top 10 on Board Game Geek or even top 100 on Board Game Geek. But I've been trying to collect and distill some of the advice that's out there. I thought maybe I'd try to pass some of that distillation onto you or put it in the permanent record. One of the things that we'll start on is basically creating the game. Because when you create the game itself, it's going to add a lot to what you do. It's why we do this. It's why we're game designers. And in a lot of cases, it's the core of it, right? Creating the game is the core of it. Some of you out there are designers and publishers. I do that. Some of you are going to design games and hand them off to a publisher, which is also just fine. If you're new to this and you're doing your first one and you think, well, I want to design games, I've got this great idea, I'm going to hit Kickstarter and I'm going to publish it, you might want to stop and think for a second, because while there's nothing wrong with that route, you have to be ready for that route. Jamie Stegmaier's done a lot of work around that, and he's detailed exactly how he got from A to B and being a designer and publishing the games and doing things from Kickstarter. You might want to check out stonemeiergames.com and his Kickstarter lessons for that. But ask yourself why you're doing it. Do you want to design games? Do you have games in you that must get out, that you want to play? Do you have games that, are you going to do this so you can design games so the world can play them? Hopefully they will. But do you want to make it a business? Do you want to be in the business of publishing? Publishing is more about product. It's more about manufacturing something, marketing it, selling it. When you get into the publishing side of the house, there's no design. You're not doing the mechanics and the theme and rolling dice and checking numbers and making sure there's a good story behind it. When you're a publisher and when you're doing all that, it's more about the product side of things. If you want to do it end to end, that's fantastic. Go for it. But just remember why you're doing it. Of all the advice I've been reading and all the stuff I've been going over, what I've found is that creating a game, designing a game, is more about what happens after you've got the rules and the theme put together. That's about 10% of it. The rest is like in the play testing, in the iteration, in the improvements, in the changes, doing it again and again and again, making sure the components are readable, making sure that what you've got makes sense. So look at it from that lens. When you think you've got a good theme, when you think you've got all of your rules put together and you know how everything is going to work, then the work begins, right? Then is when you're going to start actually doing a lot of the hard yards. But that's also when it gets fun, because you can actually start playing it. You can have other people play your game. So that's when it starts to become a game and not an idea. Eric Lang's a huge proponent of this. You don't have a game until you have pieces you can push around on a table, until you have something you can play test. Before that, it's just an idea. And everybody has ideas, right? So get to that. Keep in mind the target. When you make a game, remember that what you want is for people to voluntarily spend their time, which is in limited supply, engaged with your game. You're asking them to give up time with a different game, to not go to a movie, not go to a sporting event, to not do something else with their time so they can engage with your game. It's a little bit of responsibility there when you think about it. How do you do that? How do you make sure it's something that they're going to want to engage in, that they're going to want to do that with? So it has to be good. So don't think of making something that is a box of rules and dice. What you're trying to do is give them an experience. And I think thinking of that in that perspective actually provides more of an incentive, more of a view of what you're trying to do. They're going to have an experience either solo, with one other person, a head-to-head type game, or with a lot of people, their friends. So you really want to try to make sure that experience is the best it can be. And keep coming back to that. This bit of advice pops up in a lot of places and blogs and in that book and stuff about think of the experience you want the players to have. And if you start to stray or drift or add this feature and that feature, or the game starts to become a mountain, think about the core experience you're trying to have for the players and bring it back to that. Keep the rules as simple as you can. When it comes to rules, complexity is the enemy of experience and enjoyment. If you have a game that is supposed to take 30 minutes and the rule book is 50 pages, something's out of whack, right? The games that seem to be the best reviewed or seem to be popular on Board Game Geek or seem to get referred to a lot, oh, you should play this or you should play that, they're games with fairly simple rule sets. Concordia, Catan, Ticket to Ride. But the strategies involved are fairly complex. You can do a lot with just a few rules, and not very many rules. So don't let the rules get in the way of a good experience. If you've written so many rules and they're so detailed, pretty soon the players are just mechanisms for the rules to play the game itself. You know, if the rules are so detailed and so structured and so instructive that all the player has to do is say, oh, yep, this rule says I do this. It's not much experience. It doesn't give them much enjoyment, or they're not as invested in the gameplay. But if a rule gives them a framework, or the rules give them a framework, and they're allowed to operate within this framework and, you know, put some effort into it, make interesting choices, then you're getting somewhere. I think you're getting somewhere. So focus on that. Look at how that's going to come together. Don't let the rules obscure that experience. People, they're interesting characters, and some psychology is going to play into all of this. The experience you want them to have is going to require some psychology and some thought behind it. And if they can get to playing the game sooner, that's great. I mean, how many of you have downloaded a video game or installed a video game in your console, and when it happens, the first thing that the game does is download another 16 gigabytes of content? Oh, I bought this new game, I'm going to get it and play it. Stick it in the console, and then you wait for an hour while it downloads. You get a new game, you bring it home, you take the shrink wrap off it, you open it up, and there's an afternoon of reading the rule book before you can put the pieces on the board. Yeah, anyway, he's probably beating that dead horse a bit. So the other thing that I found myself doing, and in fact I did this with Trollbridge, the game tried to be too much to too many people. A little bit combat, a little bit trivia, a little bit this, a little that, little, you know, for Alice, Bob, and Charlie, they can all do something. But your game will not be good at any one thing if it's trying to do a little bit of everything. It just doesn't work. So figure out the experience you want them to have, and then focus on doing a few things very well. And one of the things that you might find is you'd be tempted to say, oh, I'm going to make a party game because they're in vogue right now and everybody seems to like them, and people like Cards Against Humanity and all this stuff, so I'm going to make a party game. you might not be good at that. You should probably make games that you're interested in, because if you're interested in it, or if it's something you like, chances are you have more experience with it, you have more to draw on, you have better ideas, you have a better understanding of how those things work. So you're probably going to be better at making games that you're interested in. So use that to tell you who your target audience is. Don't try to be all things to all people. Find out what you want to do and the things you like and the experiences you would like to have or you would like to create. Make that your target audience and then play to those strengths. Do a few things really well for that target audience and make the experiences you want them to have. I guess it's about focus. Really, it's about focus. If you get distracted, if you are trying to throw all these rules and everything in the kitchen sink in there, it's going to get too diverse, too thin. And don't be afraid to push the envelope a little bit. Don't be afraid to incite rage sometimes. Players don't want mediocre. Players want something that gives them this emotional, visceral experience. And it could be a happy one. It might even be a sad one. But as long as it is a strong emotion. Mark Rosewater said this. When they look at magic cards and when they're looking at creating magic cards, when they start doing the testing, they ask players how they feel about these cards and if they play them or if they not, and they kind of get this gauge. He said a lot of players will love a particular card and the other half of them will absolutely hate that card. And he said that when we make a set like that, when we do that, we want players to love it or hate it. If everybody's kind of meh about it, they don't make the card because they want it to incite some kind of emotion when it's played. Some really serious Magic players might hate playing against a particular kind of card. But the casual theme-based players, I want to make something with all slivers or blah, blah, blah. They may really love a particular card. So as long as there's an extreme emotion, it'll create an attachment. Sure, it may be negative sometimes, but that will be an experience people remember and will talk about. And even a negative experience will make people, usually will make them want to come back and try to overcome that. Hopefully it's not like the gambler's issue where, one more time and I can do it, one more time I can do it. Sure, make a lot of repeat plays, but it's not quite the right psyche you want to be playing to. So create that memorable experience, that high impact experience. And you can do that with theme and creating these big buildups and this big, huge event that is going to create high highs and low lows and some heartbreak because it didn't work and conflict and tension. To be a good game designer, you've got to be a bit theatrical. You have to really get people into the game. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of an Ameritrash approach. Very theme heavy, very, into the story of the game. But it works, J.R. Honeycutt said it really well when he said that your game needs to create cinematic experiences, cinematic moments where you've got these two huge armies that are about to clash on the battlefield, and the leaders are searching each other out across the field, trying to get to each other. You need those cinematic moments that brings your players, your audience along, and that gives them something to remember. You don't want people talking about your game later saying, and Alice rolled a 5, and oh my goodness, when Bob pushed his cubes over, I knew I had to roll the 6. That's not how you want them to remember it. You want to remember that Alice was taking the farmer approach, and then even her farms were growing so many vegetables, and she was doing so well in the market that I knew I was going to have to have a really good roundup of the cattle if I was taking the rancher approach. Even make a farm game exciting. But you want them to talk about it with emotion and attachment, and it may be easier said than done. it might just be easier said than done, but try it. Think about your favorite stories, your favorite books, movies, your favorite experiences. Even when you're a kid, you look back and you think the things you remember the most are the ones that had a high emotional impact, high or low, I should say, an extreme emotional impact, something that really stuck in your head because of that emotion will be things you remember more. Try not to leave people with too many unhappy memories, but even those can be their own fuel sometimes, But make sure that people are going to talk about the game. It's not quite like it is where you say, no news is bad news. But don't be afraid to go out there on a limb, When Eric Lang was talking about hate, he said they knew that if they were going to treat this property, this IP, correctly, they had to really cut loose on it. And it may not be something that you would want to show to your kids or something, but if you're going to be true to the IP, if you're going to be true to that emotion, true to that story, then do it. Commit. Right? Commit. If you commit, your players will commit. And you want to make sure that they have choice and that they have interest and they get vested in the outcome of the game. To do that, their choices have to have impact. Choices must have impact. Even if your game is full of A-B choices, it has to be a tough one. People have to realize that path A is going to sacrifice things that could come out of path B. That makes the choice weighty. It makes them emotionally invested in their choices, which gives them a sense of agency or a sense of ownership in what they've done with the game. That creates a lot of attachment. It creates a lot of player investment in your game, in your story. That's a good thing. To know that of the game you've created, and you finally got it out there, and it's rich in theme, and the mechanics are elegant and smooth, and the rules are simple but allow for a real deep strategy or strategies that could be played, and that people have interesting choices that are going to give them high highs and low lows. That sounds like a great experience to me. So when you're doing your brainstorming, your game design, you're coming up with these things, go for it. Commit. Well, from Dark Singapore, thanks for listening to Shop Talk, watching Shop Talk. Next week we'll have another interview episode, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks with another Shop Talk. Thanks again. I'm Rocky. Bye.